Hello, I'm Mitali Singh and I'm currently working as a legal intern at LEXIS and Company. In this video, I will be talking about rule of strict liability and rule of absolute liability. First, we'll discuss what is the rule of strict liability, when it was introduced and in which case it was introduced. Then we'll move forward towards the end topic, which is absolute liability. So we'll start with strict liability. The rule of strict liability was first introduced in one of the landmark cases, which is Rylance versus Fletcher case in the year 1869. The brief facts of the case were that the defendant hired independent contractors and the independent contractors were engineers to build a water reservoir. Then the engineer found a misused or a disused mine shafts on the land but failed to seal them properly. As a result, the water flooded from the reservoir and escaped into a coal mine of the plaintiff. Though the defendant hired independent contractors, the court in its judgment held that since the defendant built the reservoir at his own risk and it was a non-natural use of land, and therefore he would be held liable for the escape of the water. So basically, the rule of strict liability states that if there is a non-natural use of land by a person and if that causes mischief or harm to another person, then the such person would be held liable for such harm. In order to understand the rule of strict liability better, I would classify the essentials of the rule of strict liability. So the first essential of the rule of strict liability is dangerous thing. There must be a dangerous thing that might cause some mischief or harm to someone if escaped. Things like explosives, poisonous things, electricity, wire, gases, etc. And second essential of rule of strict liability is escape. There must be an escape of that dangerous thing. That dangerous thing must escape from its place. So there must be an escape of that dangerous thing out of the premises of the person. Then next essential is non-natural use of land. There must be, in order to constitute the rule of strict liability, then there must be a non-natural use of land. It must be a special use of the land and not the ordinary use of land. For example, building a water reservoir for generating power is the non-natural use of land, which was held in Rylance versus Fletcher case. So after this, we have a clear picture of the rule of strict liability, but there are few exceptions to this rule of strict liability, and now we'll study what are those exceptions. So first exception is act of God. Any event that cannot be prevented or predicted by a human being is considered to be the act of God. It's an irresistible act that could not be foreseen, or if foreseen, it could not be controlled by the act of the human beings. Then such acts would be called as act of God. This exception was held in the case of Nicholas versus Marshland. This exception was held in this case. Now we'll move forward towards the next exception to the rule of strict liability, which is consent of the plaintiff, which is also known as voluntas non fit injuria. This is a Latin maxim, voluntas non fit injuria, which means to a willing person no injury is done. This says that if a person by his or her own will or consent put himself in that dangerous situation, then he cannot claim for damage caused or injury suffered. If he has voluntarily put himself in that dangerous situation, then he cannot claim for the damages. So voluntas non fit injuria is one of the essential exceptions to the rule of strict liability. Now we'll move forward towards the next exception, which is act of third party. If harm is caused due to the act of third party who is a stranger to the defendant, the defendant will not be held liable. So here we are done with the rule of strict liability. Now we'll discuss the rule of absolute liability. So the rule of absolute liability was introduced in the case of MC Mehta versus Union of India 1987, also known as the Bhopal gas tragedy case. The brief facts of the cases are that there was leakage of gases from the factory in Bhopal, which resulted in deaths and illness of people. During an investigation, it came out that all the safety measures were in a non-functional state. In simple words, absolute liability is strict liability without exceptions. This rule states that if any entity or enterprise is involved in any dangerous thing or hazardous thing, activity causes any damage will be held liable. The escape of the dangerous thing from the land of a person is not necessary under this rule. The damage caused to anyone, even within the premises, due to such hazardous activity will make the owner of the land liable. So that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. I will see you in my next video.